Hello, how are you? I hope you're doing well. What's going on here? I missed on Friday because I had to take a family member to a medical appointment. Nothing scary, nothing urgent, just one of those things that needed to be done, which involved driving down to the city, which I'm not very good at. Don't really enjoy it at all. Hi, Grandma. Good to see you here. That's great to have you here. And just a quick hello to everybody who's watching this as a recording over on YouTube. You know who you are. Anyway, so what are we up to? We are nearly at the end of Emily of New Moon, which if you haven't come across the story before, because you just randomly are dropping into our stream, which is fine. It's written by L.M. Montgomery, that's Lucy Maud Montgomery, who is famous for having written the Anne of Green Gables series of books. Apparently she got a little bit annoyed with the publisher's antics to do with, I think, producing other things with it. I'm not quite sure what it was, or maybe they were putting her under pressure to produce more stories, and so she decided she was going to publish independently of them with a different series of books, and that is why she wrote the Emily books. There are 3 of them. There are only 3 in the series. We are just reading the first one, which is Emily of New Moon, because the age focus of this story is more the focus of the stories that I like to read, which is young children through to early teens. There are a lot of books available for older teens and adults that are in the public domain, and there are plenty of people reading those, but I want to do some stuff that is specifically family friendly, so that's why I have a focus on reading children's books. Because we're nearly finished with the Emily book, we will be reading another story in probably 2 sessions time from now, maybe 3, I'm not quite sure. Depends on how long it takes us to finish this one. And so I'm tossing up between one of the William books, written by Richmore Compton, one or the other, an English author, or a boy called William who tends to get in a bit of trouble just because adults say the most peculiar things and then expect him to understand what they mean when they imply something other than what they actually directly said. Yes, he tends to get into a little bit of trouble, but not because he's trying to. Lots of fun, lots of adventures. Or the other book we could read is another one in the Samoyed series, the last one in the Samoyed series, that's the Sand Fairy, with the children who I can't remember their surname, but it's written by Edith Nesbit, I think it is, and her children somehow seem to get themselves into trouble even if they're not meaning to as well. The Samoyed series is about a sand fairy that they found and how they get the opportunity to have all their wishes granted, 1 wish per day, and the first book has 3 wishes per day, and then after that they get 1 wish per day with the carpet and the phoenix. The book is called The Phoenix and the Carpet, but the carpet grants wishes, and then the 3rd book is called The Amulet, so I'm guessing it's got more wishes, and hopefully the children have learned that much more about being careful about how they phrase things before they start wishing. So it'll either be a Samoyed series book or another William series book, just because I'm after something a little bit more lightweight. Sorry, my chair is rolling back. Try and get it so the wheels are sideways so that it's not going to keep rolling around. Anyway, so that's where we're going after we've finished the Emily book. One of those 2 probably, but we'll see. I'm happy to take suggestions on other stories to read. No guarantees that I will, though. It will partly depend on availability and also the fact that my preference is for public domain books. I don't really want to be standing on anyone's toes if there are books that are still within copyright and an author can make some living off them because of the fact that they are still within their copyright. I would love them to receive an income from that, and me producing a free reading of them is probably not going to help them in any way. So that's part of my motivation behind reading public domain books. There are possibly some of the older ones that are still just within copyright, where the author is long gone, where I may consider it, as long as it's not a book that has been contested over by some corporate that now holds the current copyright. Not prepared to have takedowns happening because of that sort of thing. So, suggestions are, I'm most open to suggestions. If you are watching this on YouTube, you can put a comment in below any of my videos, which is why they're not listed as for children specifically, because if you have them designated as children's videos on YouTube, then you can't actually allow comments to be made on them at the same time. So I had to make a choice between the two. If you are watching on Twitch and you're watching live, then you can type anything into the chat if you wish to. Otherwise, with both of those options, you can also still connect with me through Discord if you're used to using Discord. I do have a server. It's very, very quiet. You will not get overloaded by messages over there. Very occasionally I will post illustrations from one of the stories we've read, or pictures of places that remind me of some of the places that we've read about. And it's also open for other people to be able to share things that they relate to the books that we've been reading as well, plus make story suggestions. So with all of that said and out of the way, the next bit is hello to new visitors. Hopefully you'll settle in and stay and enjoy story time with us. Hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's books because otherwise nobody gets to hear them, and there's some delightful ones out there. Quite often bucking the trend of what was currently acceptable at the time that they were written in terms of children's behaviour especially. We've had some quite challenging children who don't quite fit the typical mould of behaviour at the time when the books were written. And well done those authors for actually daring to write children who had a mind of their own, who weren't quiet and silent and never did or said anything that was out of the ordinary, which would make for a very boring read. Anyway, so suggestions, tips that I have for you if you are here for a story. Have yourself something to drink handy, preferably a drink of water, because that will keep your brain working well and your body. I've also got some juice. So something to drink, something to snack on, and my snack of the day is New Zealand snack log. It's a little bit like a granola or a muesli bar, but very small. And also something to drink, something to eat, and somewhere comfortable to sit. Unless, of course, you are actually studying or working or doing chores or something like that, in which case you possibly aren't allowed to just choose your own comfortable seat. You have to get on with something that you're doing, and I'm just giving your brain something else to focus on, in which case I'm sorry about the uncomfortable seat, but hey, let's get on with the story. Here we go. Emily of New Moon by L.M. Montgomery. We are reading chapter 27. There you go, I got the numbers right today. Chapter 27, The Vow of Emily. Ooh, what's going to happen? In Dean Priest, Emily found for the first time since her father had died a companion who could fully sympathise. She was always at her best with him, with a delightful feeling of being understood. To love is easy and therefore common, but to understand, how rare that is. They roamed the wonderlands of fancy together in the magic August days that followed upon Emily's adventure on the bay shore. She had fallen down the cliff while she was reaching for a flower that she wanted to pick, and he had rescued her. They talked together of exquisite, immortal things, and were at home with nature's old felicities, of which Wordsworth so happily speaks. Emily showed him all the poetry and descriptions in her Jimmy book. Her Jimmy book is a book for writing in that cousin Jimmy had given her as a Christmas present, because she didn't have ready access to a book for writing in. Her great aunt was very, very careful about, I think it's her great aunt, or her aunt, was very, very careful about not spending money on frivolous things, and so she considered a book just for writing imaginary stories in to be a frivolous thing, but because Cousin Jimmy had given it to her. Cousin Jimmy was an older generation. She couldn't take it away, could she? Anyway, so that's her Jimmy book. Emily showed him all the poetry and descriptions in her Jimmy book, and he read them gravely, and exactly as father had done, made little criticisms that did not hurt her because she knew they were just. As for Dean Priest, a certain secret wellspring of fancy that had long seemed dry bubbled up in him sparklingly again. "You make me believe in fairies, whether I will or no," he told her, "and that means youth. As long as you believe in fairies, you can't grow old." "But I can't believe in fairies myself," protested Emily sorrowfully. "I wish I could." "But you are a fairy yourself, or you wouldn't be able to find fairyland. You can't buy a ticket there, you know. Either the fairies themselves give you your passport at your christening, or they don't. That's all there is to it," said Dean Priest. "Isn't fairyland the loveliest word?" said Emily dreamily. "Because it means everything the human heart desires," said Dean. When he talked to her, Emily felt as if she were looking into some enchanted mirror where her own dreams and secret hopes were reflected back to her with added charm. If Dean Priest were a cynic, he showed no cynicism to Emily, but in her company he was not a cynic. He had shed his years and become a boy again, with a boy's untainted visions. She loved him for the world he opened to her view. There was such fun in him too, such sly, surprising fun. He told her jokes, he made her laugh. He told her strange old tales of forgotten gods who were very beautiful, of court festivals and the bridals of kings, bridal ceremonies, getting married. He seemed to have the history of the whole world at his fingers' ends. He described things to her in unforgettable phrases as they walked by the bay shore or sat in the overgrown, shadowy old garden of Wither Grange. When he spoke of Athens as the city of the violet crown, Emily realised afresh what magic is made when the right words are wedded, and she loved to think of Rome as the city of the 7 hills. Dean had been in Rome and Athens and almost everywhere else. "I didn't know anyone ever talked as you do except in books," she told him. Dean laughed, with a little note of bitterness that was so often present in his laughter, though less often with Emily than with other people. It was really his laughter that had won Dean his reputation for cynicism. People so often felt that he was laughing at them instead of with them. "I've only had books for companions most of my life," he said. "Is it any wonder I talk like them?" "I'm sure I'll like studying history after this," said Emily, "except Canadian history. I'll never like it. So dull. Not just at the first, when we belonged to France and there was plenty of fighting, but after that it's nothing but politics." The book is set in Canada, and it's written by a Canadian author. That's the Canadian history reference. "The happiest countries, like the happiest women, have no history," said Dean. "I hope I'll have a history," cried Emily. "I want a thrilling career." "We all do, foolish one. Do you know what makes history? Pain and shame and rebellion and bloodshed and heartache. Star, ask yourself how many hearts ached and broke to make those crimson and purple pages in history that you find so enthralling. I told you the story of Leonidas, I think it is, and his Spartans the other day. They had mothers, sisters, and sweethearts. If they could have fought a bloodless battle at the polls, wouldn't it have been better, if not so dramatic? "I can't feel that way," said Emily confusedly. She was not old enough to think or say, as she would say 10 years later, the heroes of Thermopylae had been an inspiration to humanity for centuries. What squabble around a ballot box will ever be that? "And like all female creatures, you form your opinions by your feelings," said Dean. "Well, hope for your thrilling career, but remember that if there is to be drama in your life, somebody must pay the piper. In the coin of suffering. If not you, then someone else." "Oh no, I wouldn't like that." Be then content with fewer thrills. What about your tumble over the bank down there? That came near being a tragedy. What if I hadn't found you? But you did find me, cried Emily. I like near escapes, after they're over, she added. If everybody had always been happy, there'd be nothing to read about. Tweed made a third in their rambles. Tweed is his dog. And Emily grew very fond of him, without losing any of her loyalty to the cat folk. I like cats with one part of my mind, and dogs with another part, she said. I like cats, but I never keep one, Dean said. They're too exacting. They ask too much. Dogs want only love, but cats demand worship. They have never got over the bubastis habit of godship. Emily understood this. He had told her all about old Egypt and the goddess Pasht, but she did not quite agree with him. Kittens don't want to be worshipped, she said. They just want to be cuddled. By their priestesses, yes. If you had been born on the banks of the Nile 5,000 years ago, Emily, you would have been a priestess of Pasht, an adorable, slim, brown creature with a fillet of gold around your black hair and bands of silver on those ankles Aunt Nancy admires, with dozens of sacred little godlings frisking about you under the palms of the temple courts. Oh, gasped Emily rapturously, that gave me the flash. And, she added wonderingly, just for a moment it made me homesick too. Why? Why? Because I haven't a doubt you were just such a priestess in a former incarnation, and my words reminded your soul of it. Do you believe in the doctrine of the transmigration of souls, Star? But of course not, brought up by the true blue Calvinists of New Moon. What does it mean? Asked Emily, and when Dean explained it to her, she thought it a very delightful belief, but was quite sure Aunt Elizabeth would not approve of it. So I won't believe it yet, she said gravely. Then it all came to an end quite suddenly. It had been taken for granted by all concerned that Emily was to stay at Wither Grange until the end of August. But in mid-August, Aunt Nancy said suddenly to her one day, "Go home, Emily. I am tired of you. I like you very well. You're not stupid, and you're passably pretty, and you've behaved exceedingly well. Tell Elizabeth you do the Murrays credit, but I'm tired of you. Go home." I'm thinking she's getting tired of having to watch what she talks about, because they're having to watch what they gossip over when Emily's around, because she gets upset by some things. Emily's feelings were mixed. It hurt her to be told Aunt Nancy was tired of her. It would hurt anyone. It rankled in her for several days until she thought of a sharp answer she might have made Aunt Nancy and wrote it down in her Jimmy book. She felt quite as relieved then as if she had really said it. And she was sorry to leave Wither Grange. She had grown to love the old, beautiful house with its flavour of hidden secrets, a flavour that was wholly a trick of its architecture, for there had never been anything in it but the simple tale of births and deaths and marriages and everyday living that most houses have. She was sorry to leave the bay shore and the quaint garden and the gazing ball and the Chessy cat and the pink room bed of freedom, and because she doesn't have to share it with anyone, and most of all she was sorry to leave Dean Priest. But on the other hand, it was delightful to think of going back to New Moon and all the loved ones there, Teddy and his dear whistle, Ilse and her stimulating comradeship, Perry with his determined reaching up for higher things, Saucy Sal and the new kitten that must be needing proper training now, and the fairy world of the Midsummer Night's Dream. They were going to put on the play of the Midsummer Night's Dream. Cousin Jimmy's garden would be in its prime of splendour. The August apples would be ripe. Suddenly Emily was very ready to go. She packed her little black box jubilantly and found it an excellent chance to work in neatly a certain line from a poem Dean had recently read to her, which had captured her fancy. "Goodbye, proud world, I'm going home," she declaimed feelingly, standing at the top of the long, dark, shining staircase and apostrophising the row of grim priest photographs hanging on the wall. But she was much annoyed over one thing. Aunt Nancy would not give her back the picture that Teddy had painted. "I'm going to keep it," Aunt Nancy said, grinning and shaking her gold tassels. She's got these long, tassely gold earrings. "Some day that picture will be worth something as the early effort of a famous artist." "I only lent it to you. I told you I only lent it to you," said Emily indignantly. "I'm an unscrupulous old demon," said Aunt Nancy coolly. "That is what the priests all call me behind my back, don't they, Caroline? May as well have the game as the name. I happen to have a fancy for that picture, that's all. I'm going to frame it and hang it here in my parlour. But I'll leave it to you in my will, that and the Chessy cat and the gazing ball and my gold earrings. Nothing else. I'm not going to leave you a cent of my money. Never count on that." Now, just in case you're wondering, if you missed it when she first arrived at this house, the Chessy cat is a door knocker in the style of a Cheshire cat, the cat with the big grin, such as you had in Alice in Wonderland. And we shared a picture of that. I wonder if that's the one that I currently have here. Yes, I do. There's a Chessy cat. A Chessy cat door knocker, and that was on one of the bedroom doors, and Emily was quite taken with it. There's a range of different designs, but that's the one that I found the most of. Anyway, we'll carry on. And the gazing ball was a big shiny glass globe, not like a disco ball where it's pieces of mirror attached to it. It's actually a glass ball that has been mirrored itself on the inside probably, and it hangs from a light fitting in the centre of one of the rooms. They were quite fashionable at one stage, but usually these days they're usually used as an ornament in a garden, but this one is used in the house. Anyway, so Aunt Nancy had said, "Nothing else. I'm not going to leave you a cent of my money. Never count on that." "I don't want it," said Emily loftily. "I'm going to earn heaps of money for myself, but it isn't fair of you to keep my picture. It was given to me." "I never was fair," said Aunt Nancy. "Was I, Caroline?" "No," said Caroline shrewishly. "You see, don't make a fuss, Emily. You've been a very good child, but I feel that I've done my duty to you for this year. Go back to New Moon, and when Elizabeth won't let you do things, tell her I always let you. I don't know if it will do any good, but try it. Elizabeth, like everyone else related to me, is always wondering what I'm going to do with my money." So apparently they all butter up to her somewhat to try and go on into her will to inherit it. She's quite wealthy. I don't know. Cousin Jimmy came over for Emily. How glad she was to see his kind face with its gentle elfish eyes and forked beard again. But she felt very badly when she turned to Dean. "If you like, I'll kiss you goodbye," she said chokily. Emily did not like kissing people. She did not really want to kiss Dean, but she liked him so much she thought she ought to extend all courtesies to him. Dean looked down, smiling into her face, so young, so pure, so softly curved. "No, I don't want you to kiss me, yet. And our first kiss mustn't have the flavour of goodbye. It would be a bad omen, Star of Morning. I'm sorry you're going, but I'll see you again before long. My oldest sister lives in Blairwater, you know, and I feel a sudden access of brotherly affection towards her. I seem to see myself visiting her very often henceforth. In the meantime, remember you have promised to write me every week, and I'll write you." "Nice fat letters," coaxed Emily. "I love fat letters." "Fat? They'll be positively corpulent, Star. Now I'm not even going to say goodbye. Let's make a pact, Star. We'll never say goodbye to each other. We'll just smile and go." Emily made a gallant effort, smiled, and went. Aunt Nancy and Caroline returned to the back parlour and their cribbage. It's a card game. Dean Priest whistled for Tweed and went to the bay shore. He was so lonely that he laughed at himself. Emily and Cousin Jimmy had so much to talk of that the drive home seemed very short. New moon was white in the evening sunshine, which also lay with exceeding mellowness on the grey old barns. The three princesses, shooting up against the silvery sky, that's three trees, quite distinctive ones, were as remote and princessly as ever. The old gulf was singing away down over the fields. Aunt Laura came running out to meet them, her lovely blue eyes shining with pleasure. Aunt Elizabeth was in the cookhouse preparing supper, and only shook hands with Emily, but looked a trifle less grim and stately than usual, and she had made Emily's favourite cream puffs for supper. Perry was hanging about, barefooted and sunburnt, to tell her all the gossip of kittens and calves and little pigs and the new foal. Ilse came swooping over, and Emily discovered she had forgotten how vivid Ilse was. How brilliant her amber eyes, how golden her mane of spun silk hair, looking more golden than ever under the bright blue silk tam that Mrs. Sims had bought her in Shrewsbury. As an article of dress, the loud tam made Laura Murray's eyes and sensibilities ache. But its colour certainly did set off Ilse's wonderful hair. She engulfed Emily in a rapturous embrace and quarrelled bitterly with her 10 minutes later over the fact that Emily refused to give her Saucy Sal's sole surviving kitten. "I ought to have it, you doddering hyena," stormed Ilse. "It's as much mine as yours, pig. Our old barn cat is its father." "Such talk is not decent," said Aunt Elizabeth, pale with horror. "And if you two children are going to quarrel over that kitten, I'll have it drowned. Remember that." Ilse was finally appeased by Emily's offering to let her name the kitten and have a half interest in it. Ilse named it Daffodil. Emily did not think this suitable, since from the fact of Cousin Jimmy referring to it as Little Tommy, she suspected it was of the sterner sex. But rather than again provoke Aunt Elizabeth's wrath by discussing tabooed subjects, gender, commonly known as sex back then, not the act, but the definition of whether male or female was referred to as the sex of something, still is, I can call it Daff, she thought. That sounds more masculine. The kitten was a delicate bit of striped greyness that reminded Emily of her dear lost Mike's. She's had two cats called Mike. Lost where I was on the page. And it smelled so nice, of warmth and clean furriness, with whiffs of the clover hay where Saucy Sal had made her mother nest. After supper she heard Teddy's whistle in the old orchard, the same enchanting call. Emily flew out to greet him. After all, there was nobody just like Teddy in the world. They had an ecstatic scamper up to the tansy patch to see a new puppy that Dr. Burnley had given Teddy. Mrs. Kent, this is Teddy's mother, did not seem very glad to see Emily. She was colder and more remote than ever, and she sat and watched the two children playing with the chubby little pup with a smouldering fire in her dark eyes that made Emily vaguely uncomfortable whenever she happened to glance up and encounter it. Never before had she sensed Mrs. Kent's dislike for her so keenly as that night. "Why doesn't your mother like me?" she asked Teddy bluntly when they carried little Leo to the barn for the night. "Because I do," said Teddy briefly. "She doesn't like anything I like. I'm afraid she'll poison Leo very soon. I wish she wasn't so fond of me." He burst out in the beginning of a revolt against this abnormal jealousy of love, which he felt, rather than understood, to be a fetter that was becoming galling. "She says she won't let me take up Latin and algebra this year. You know, Miss Brownell said I might, because I'm not to go to college. She says she can't bear to part from me, ever. I don't care about the Latin and stuff, but I want to learn to be an artist. I want to go away someday to the schools where they teach that. She won't let me. She hates my pictures now because she thinks I like them better than her. I don't. I love Mother. She's awful sweet and good to me every other way, but she thinks I do, and she's burned some of them. I know she has. They're missing from the barn." and I can't find them anywhere. If she does anything to Leo, I'll hate her." "Tell her that," said Emily coolly, with some of the Murray shrewdness coming uppermost in her. "She doesn't know that you know she poisoned Smoke and Buttercup. Tell her you do know it, and that if she does anything to Leo, you won't love her any more. She'll be so frightened of your not loving her that she won't meddle with Leo. I know. Tell her gently. Don't hurt her feelings, but tell her." "It will," concluded Emily with a killing imitation of Aunt Elizabeth delivering an ultimatum, "be better for all concerned," she said. "I believe I will," said Teddy, much impressed. "I can't have Leo disappear like my cats did. He's the only dog I've ever had, and I've always wanted a dog. Oh, Emily, I'm so glad you're back." It was very nice to be told this, especially by Teddy. Emily went home to New Moon happily. In the old kitchen, the candles were lighted, and their flames were dancing in the winds of the August night, blowing through the door and window. Remember, this is late summer. "I suppose you'll not like candles very well, Emily, after being used to lamps at Wither Grange," said Aunt Laura with a little sigh. It was one of the bitter small things in Laura Murray's life that Elizabeth's tyranny extended to candles. Emily looked round her thoughtfully. One candle sputtered and bobbed at her as if greeting her. One, with a long wick, glowed and smouldered like a sulky little demon. One had a tiny flame, a sly, meditative candle. One swayed with a queer, fiery grace in the draught from the door. One burned with a steady, upright flame like a faithful soul. It all depends on where they are and where the drafts are coming from. "I don't know, Aunt Laura," she answered slowly. "You can be friends with candles. I believe I like the candles best after all." Aunt Elizabeth, coming in from the cookhouse, heard her. Something like pleasure gleamed in her gulf blue eyes. "You have some sense in you," she said. "That's the second compliment she has paid me," thought Emily. "I think Emily has grown taller since she went to Wither Grange," said Aunt Laura, looking at her rather wistfully. Sorry, burping here. Aunt Elizabeth. Ooh, sorry about that. Deafening you by whacking the microphone and having it fall over. We'll try that again. Aunt Elizabeth, snuffing the candles, glanced sharply over her glasses. "I can't see it," she said. "Her dress is just the same length on her." "I'm sure she has," persisted Laura. Cousin Jimmy, to settle the dispute, measured Emily by the sitting-room door. She just touched the former mark. "You see," said Aunt Elizabeth triumphantly, liking to be right even in this small matter. "She looks different," said Laura with a sigh. Laura, after all, was right. Emily had grown. Taller and older in soul, if not in body. It was this change which Laura felt, as close and tender affection swiftly feels. The Emily who returned, trying to get the page to turn, from Wither Grange was not the Emily who had gone there. She was no longer wholly the child. Aunt Nancy's family histories over which she had pondered, her enduring anguish over the story of Ilse's mother, that terrible hour when she had lain cheek by jowl with death on the cliffs of the bay shore, her association with Dean Priest, all had combined to mature her intelligence and her emotions. When she went to the garret next morning and pulled out her precious little bundle of manuscripts to read them lovingly over, she was amazed and rather grieved to find that they were not half so good as she had believed they were. Some of them were positively silly, she thought. She was ashamed of them, so ashamed that she smuggled them down to the cookhouse stove and burned them, much to Aunt Elizabeth's annoyance when she came to prepare dinner and found the firebox all choked up with charred paper. Emily no longer wondered that Miss Brownell had made fun of them, though this did not mellow her bitterness of remembrance in regard to that lady in any degree. The rest she put back on the sofa shelf, including The Child of the Sea, which still impressed her as fairly good, though not just the wonderful composition she had once deemed it. She felt that many passages could be rewritten to their advantage. Then she immediately began writing a new poem, on returning home after weeks' absence. As everything and everybody connected with New Moon had to be mentioned in this poem, it promised to be quite long, and to furnish agreeable occupation for spare minutes in many weeks to come. It was very good to be home again. There is no place just like dear New Moon, thought Emily. One thing that marked her return, one of those little household epochs that made a keener impression on the memory and imagination than perhaps their real importance warrants, was the fact that she was given a room of her own. Aunt Elizabeth had found her unshared slumber too sweet a thing to be again surrendered. She decided that she could not put up any longer with a squirming bedfellow who asked unearthly questions at any hour of the night she took it into her head to do so. So, after a long conference with Laura, it was settled that Emily was to have her mother's room, the lookout, as it was called, though it was not really a lookout, but it occupied the place in New Moon looking over the front door to the garden, that the real lookouts did in other Blairwater houses, so it went by that name. It had been prepared for Emily's occupancy in her absence, and when bedtime came on the first evening of her return, Aunt Elizabeth curtly told her that henceforth she was to have her mother's room. "All to myself?" exclaimed Emily. "Yes, we will expect you to take care of it yourself and keep it very tidy." "It has never been slept in since the night before your mother went away," said Aunt Laura with a queer sound in her voice, a sound of which Aunt Elizabeth disapproved. "Your mother," she said, looking coldly at Emily over the flame of a candle, an attitude that gave a rather gruesome effect to her aquiline features, "ran away, flouted her family, and broke her father's heart. She was a silly, ungrateful, disobedient girl. I hope you will never disgrace your family by such conduct." "Oh, Aunt Elizabeth," said Emily breathlessly, "when you hold the candle down like that, it makes your face look just like a corpse." "Oh, it's so interesting." Aunt Elizabeth turned and led the way upstairs in grim silence. Not quite the response to her statement that she was hoping for. There was no use in wasting perfectly good admonitions on a child like this. Left alone in her lookout, lighted dimly by the one small candle, Emily gazed about her with keen and thrilling interest. She could not get into bed until she had explored every bit of it. The room was very old-fashioned, like all the New Moon rooms. The walls were papered with a design of slender gilt diamonds, enclosing golden stars, and hung with worked woolen mottos. That's a saying, worked, done with stitch work out of wool thread, and they are hung on the wall as a reminder of certain things that one ought to think about. Worked woolen mottos and pictures that had been supplements in the girlhood of her aunts. Often pictures, there would be extra pictures in certain household magazines that were for children that were usually more sort of uplifting type pictures. One of them, hanging over the head of the bed, represented two guardian angels. In its day this had been much admired, but Emily looked at it with distaste. "I don't like feather wings on angels," she said decidedly. "Angels should have rainbowy wings." On the floor was a pretty homespun carpet and round braided rugs. There was a high black bedstead. I was just checking to see if it was a high back, like chair, or high and black coloured bedstead with carved posts, a fat feather bed, and an Irish chain quilt, but, as Emily was glad to see, no curtains. A little table with funny claw feet and brass-knobbed drawers stood by the window, which was curtained with muslin frills. One of the window panes contorted the landscape funnily, making a hill where no hill was. That's because the glass has ripples in it, and it has that effect. Remind me to tell you about my grandfather's window. Now I need to find it. One of the window panes contorted the landscape funnily, making a hill where no hill was. Emily liked this. She couldn't have told why, but it was really because it gave the pane an individuality of its own. An oval mirror in a tarnished gilt frame hung above the table. Emily was delighted to find she could see herself in it. All but my boots, she thought, without craning or tipping it, and it doesn't twist my face or turn my complexion green, she thought happily. One where the glass isn't smooth will make your reflection look a little bit ripply as well. That's the twisting of the face. Making her look green is because it's the colour of the glass will discolour the person who's looking in it. Unless it's because the silvering isn't as silver as it should be. Anyway. Doesn't turn my complexion green, she thought happily. 2 high-backed black chairs with horsehair seats, a little washstand with a blue basin and pitcher, that's a big jug, and a faded ottoman with woolen roses cross-stitched on it completed the furnishing. On the little mantel were vases full of dried and coloured grasses, and a fascinating pot-bellied bottle filled with West Indian shells. On either side were lovable little cupboards with leaded glass doors like those in the sitting room. Underneath was a small fireplace. I wonder if Aunt Elizabeth will ever let me have a little fire here, thought Emily. The room was full of that indefinable charm found in all rooms where the pieces of furniture, whether old or new, are well acquainted with each other, and the walls and floors are on good terms. Emily felt it all over her as she flitted about, examining everything. This was her room, and she loved it already. She felt perfectly at home. I belong here, she breathed happily. She felt deliciously near to her mother, as if Juliet's star had suddenly become real to her. It thrilled her to think that her mother had probably crocheted the lace cover on the round pin cushion on the table. There you go. Sorry, I'm just looking to see if my throat lozenge is here. I think I must have eaten that one and I'll have to get another one out. But I'll do that in the break. Pin cushion, trying to find it. Her mother had crocheted the lace cover on the round pin cushion on the table, and that fat black jar of potpourri on the mantel. Her mother must have compounded it. Potpourri is dried flowers. Sometimes they're semi-dried, where they're actually put in with powders and salts and things like that. And so they go sort of almost leathery, the petals, and they retain a lot more fragrance that actually helps with keeping a room smelling fresh. Her mother must have compounded it. When Emily lifted the lid, a faint spicy odour floated out. The souls of all the roses that had bloomed through many olden summers at New Moon seemed to be prisoned there in a sort of flower purgatory. Something in the haunting, mystical, elusive odour gave Emily the flash, and her room had received its consecration. There was a picture of her mother hanging over the mantel, a large daguerreotype taken when she was a little girl. It's a particular type of photo, one of the very early forms of photograph is daguerreotype. Emily looked at it lovingly. She had the picture of her mother which her father had left, taken after their marriage, but when Aunt Elizabeth had brought that from Maywood to New Moon, she had hung it in the parlour, where Emily seldom saw it because they didn't often use the parlour. This picture in her bedroom of the golden-haired, rose-cheeked girl was all her own. She could look at it, talk to it, at will. "Oh, Mother," she said, "what did you think of when you were a little girl here like me? I wish I could have known you then. And to think nobody has ever slept here since that last night you did, before you ran away with Father. Aunt Elizabeth says you were wicked to do it, but I don't think you were. It wasn't as if you were running away with a stranger. Anyway, I'm glad you did, because if you hadn't, there wouldn't have been any me." Emily, very glad that there was an Emily, opened her lookout window as high as it would go, got into bed, because when she has shared the bed and room with Aunt Elizabeth sleeps with the window shut. And Emily has grown up sleeping with the window open, and she has missed this. So she's opened the window as wide as she can before she goes to bed to go to sleep. Opened her lookout window as high as it would go, got into bed, and drifted off to sleep, feeling a happiness that was so deep as to be almost pain, as she listened to the sonorous sweep of the night wind among the great trees in Lofty John's bush. When she wrote to her father a few days later, she began the letter, "Dear Father and Mother." "And I'll always write the letter to you as well as Father after this, Mother. I'm sorry I left you out so long, but you didn't seem real till that night I came home. I made the bed beautifully next morning. Aunt Elizabeth didn't find a bit of fault with it, and I dusted everything, and when I went out, I knelt down and kissed the doorstep. I didn't think Aunt Elizabeth saw me, but she did and said I had gone crazy. I had gone crazy. Why does Aunt Elizabeth think anyone is crazy who does something she never does? I said, no, it's only because I love my room so much. And she sniffed and said, you'd better love your God. But so I do, dear Father and Mother, and I love him better than ever since I have my dear room. I can see all over the garden from it and into Lofty John's bush and one little bit of the Blair water through the gap in the trees where the yesterday road runs. I like to go to bed early now. I love to lie all alone in my own room and make poetry and think out descriptions of things while I look through the open window at the stars and the nice, big, kind, quiet trees in Lofty John's bush. Oh, Father dear, and Mother, we are going to have a new teacher. Miss Brownell is not coming back. She is going to be married. And Ilse says that when her father heard it, he said, God help the man. And the new teacher is a Mr. Carpenter. Ilse saw him when he came to see her father about the school because Dr. Burnley is a trustee this year, and she says he has bushy grey hair and whiskers. He is married too, and is going to live in that little old house down in the hollow below the school. It seems so funny to think of a teacher having a wife. And whiskers. I am glad to be home, but I miss Dean and the gazing ball. Aunt Elizabeth looked very cross when she saw my bang, but didn't say anything. Aunt Laura says just to keep quiet and go on wearing it. But I don't feel comfortable going against Aunt Elizabeth, so I have combed it all back, except a little fringe. I don't feel quite comfortable about it even yet, but I have to put up with it being a little uncomfortable for the sake of my looks. Aunt Laura says bustles are going out of style, so I'll never be able to have one, but I don't care because I think they're ugly. Rhoda Stewart will be cross because she was just longing to be old enough to wear a bustle. I hope I'll be able to have a gin jar all to myself when the weather gets cold. There's a row of gin jars on the high shelf in the cookhouse. Gin jars were used as bed heaters, like a hot water bottle, except they're not flexible. It's obviously a particular shaped ceramic bottle that's used because it's not going to tip over and leak the same way most jars would. So that's why they refer to these gin jars. There's a row of gin jars on the high shelf in the cookhouse. They used to use one in Aunt Elizabeth's bed if it was really cold, but otherwise not. Teddy and I had the nicest adventure yesterday evening. We are going to keep it a secret from everybody, partly because it's so nice, and partly because we think we'll get a fearful scolding for one thing we did. We went up to the disappointed house, and we found one of the boards on the windows was loose, so we pried it off and crawled in and went all over the house. It is lathed but not plastered. That means hard to... In a normal house these days, the way they're built in New Zealand and a lot of other places, you have timber frames and then you put wallboard on them, plasterboard. There's a whole lot of special names for it. In the old days, they didn't have that board. So what they did was they put lath, which is a very thin, it's only about an inch wide and much thinner, on horizontally on the walls with little gaps in between as across a wall surface. They put them on, and then they put a layer of very loosely woven sacking, which is called hessian, over the top of that, and then they put plaster onto it, so that the hessian is fastened to the lath boards, and then they spread plaster across the surface of this, so the lath timbers hold everything straight, and provide a little bit of structure. And then the hessian works as a network of fibre that helps the plaster to stick together and stay up against the wall. That's just the way they used to do it. They used to do that for ceilings as well. So it's a stage of a house being built back then. There are some places that still do it, but it's not a very common thing these days because of wallboard. So the fact that there's lath on the walls but no plaster means that the house never got past that stage of being built. So I'll carry on. I just thought that you might find it weird that they're talking about this stuff called lath. It was lathed but not plastered, and the shavings are lying all over the floors, just as the carpenters left them years ago. It seemed more disappointed than ever. I just felt like crying. There was a dear little fireplace in one room, so we went to work and kindled a fire in it with shavings and pieces of boards. This is the thing we would be scolded for, likely. And then sat before it on an old carpenter's bench and talked. We decided that when we grew up we would buy the disappointed house and live there together. Teddy said he supposed we'd have to get married, but I thought maybe we could find a way to manage without going to all that bother. Teddy will paint pictures, and I will write poetry, and we will have toast and bacon and marmalade every morning for breakfast, just like with the Grange. But never porridge, and we'll always have lots of nice things to eat in the pantry, and I'll make lots of jam, and Teddy is always going to help me wash the dishes, and we'll hang the gazing ball from the middle of the ceiling in the fireplace room, because likely Aunt Nancy will be dead by then. When the fire had burned out, we jammed the board and, sorry, my nose is itchy, and no, it's not from the cat this time. I haven't seen him for a few hours. We jammed the board into place in the window and came away. Every now and then today, Teddy would say to me toast and bacon and marmalade in the most mysterious tones, and Ilse and Perry are wild because they can't find out what he means. Cousin Jimmy has got Jimmy Joe Bell to help with the harvest. Jimmy Joe Bell comes from over Derry Pond way. There are a great many French there, and when a French girl marries, they call her mostly by her husband's first name, instead of Mrs. like the English do. If a girl named Mary marries a man named Leon, she will always be called Mary Leon after that. But in Jimmy Joe Bell's case, it is the other way, and he is called by his wife's name. I asked Cousin Jimmy why, and he said it was because Jimmy Joe was a poor stick of a creature, and Bell wore the breeches. But still I don't understand. Jimmy Joe wears breeches himself. That means trousers. And why should he be called Jimmy Joe Bell instead of her being called Bell Jimmy Joe, just because she wears them too? I won't rest till I find out. Cousin Jimmy's garden is splendid now. The tiger lilies are out. I'm trying to love them because nobody seems to like them at all, but deep down in my heart I know I love the late roses best. You just can't help loving the roses best. Ilse and I hunted all over the old orchard today for a four-leafed clover and couldn't find one. Then I found one in a clump of clover by the dairy steps tonight when I was straining the milk, and never thinking of clovers. Cousin Jimmy says that is all the way luck always comes, and it's no use to look for it. It is lovely to be with Ilse again. We have only fought twice since I came home. I am going to try not to fight with Ilse any more because I don't think it is dignified, although quite interesting. But it is hard not to, because even when I keep quiet and don't say a word, Ilse thinks that's a way of fighting and gets madder and says worse things than ever. Aunt Elizabeth says it always takes two to make a quarrel, but she doesn't know Ilse as I do. Ilse called me a sneaking albatross today. I wonder how many animals are left to call me. She never repeats the same one twice. I wish she wouldn't clap a I wish she wouldn't clap her claw Perry so much. Clap a claw is a word I learnt from Aunt Nancy. Very striking, I think. I'm thinking it's a word she probably shouldn't use with Aunt Elizabeth. It seems as if she couldn't bear him. He dared Teddy to jump from the henhouse roof across to the pighouse roof. Teddy wouldn't. He said he would try it if it had to be done, or would do anybody any good, but he wasn't going to do it just to show off. Perry did it and landed safe. If he hadn't, he might have broken his neck. Then he bragged about it and said Teddy was afraid, and Ilse turned red as a beet and told him to shut up or she would bite his snout off. She can't bear to have anything said against Teddy. But I guess he can take care of himself. Ilse can't study for the entrance either. Her father won't let her, but she says she doesn't care. She says she's going to run away when she gets a little older and study for the stage. That sounds wicked, but interesting. I felt very queer and guilty when I saw Ilse first because I knew about her mother. I don't know why I felt guilty, because I had nothing to do with it. The feeling is wearing away a little now, but I'm so unhappy by spells over it. I wish I could either forget it altogether or find out the rights of it, because I'm sure nobody knows them. I had a letter from Dean today. He writes lovely letters, just as if I was a grown-up. He sent me a little poem he had cut out of a paper called The Fringed Gentian. He said it made him think of me. It's all lovely, but I like the last verse best of all. This is it. Then whisper, blossom, in thy sleep, how I may upward climb the alpine path, so hard, so steep, that leads to heights sublime, how I may reach that far-off goal of true and honoured fame, and write upon its shining scroll a woman's humble name. When I read that, the flash came, and I took a sheet of paper. I forgot to tell you, Cousin Jimmy gave me a little box of paper and envelopes on the sly, and I wrote on it, I, Emily Bird Star, do solemnly vow this day that I will climb the alpine path and write my name on the scroll of fame. Then I put it in the envelope and sealed it up and wrote on it the vow of Emily Bird Star, aged 12 years and 3 months, and put it away on the sofa shelf in the garret. I am writing a murder story now, and I am trying to feel how a man would feel who was a murderer. It is creepy but thrilling. I almost feel as if I had murdered somebody. Good night, dear father and mother. Your lovingest daughter, Emily. P.S. I have been wondering how I'll sign my name when I grow up and print my pieces. I don't know which would look best, Emily Bird Star in full, or Emily B. Star, or E.B. Star, or E. Bird Star. Sometimes I think I'll have a nom de plume. That is another name you pick for yourself. It's in my dictionary among the French phrases at the back. If I did that, then I could hear people talking of my pieces right before me, never suspecting, and say just what they really thought of them. That would be interesting, but perhaps not always comfortable. I think I'll be E. Bird Star. And that's the end of the chapter. And I'm sorry, but that's going to be the end of our reading today, just because my voice is getting a little bit tired, a little bit dry, a little bit uncomfortable. Yes, the juice will help. But I'm also getting to that stage where the words make my head start to feel a little bit, ooh. Have you ever had that? It doesn't tend to happen to me when I'm reading in my head, but when I'm reading out loud, I'm not sure. It may be the vibrations of your voice tend to affect the feel in my head. So we'll see how we go with next time, and if there's going to be a one after that, because I'm not quite sure how long the rest of the chapters are. So we've just read The Vow of Emily, and that's where the name for the following 2 books come from. Emily Climbs and Emily's Quest. That's from the Alpine Path poem. I wonder if that's a real one. Maybe you could look that up. So the chapters to go are A Weaver of Dreams, that's our next one. Sacrilege, ooh, I think someone's going to get in trouble with Aunt Elizabeth. When the Curtain Lifted, Understanding About Something maybe, and Emily's Greatest Moment. I'm just going to see how long because the book will say that it's got, say, 30 pages left in a chapter, but when it's the last chapter in the book, it then follows it, this is because it's through Project Gutenberg, it then follows it with information about the editing process to be able to make it a digital book. So this one has 27 pages of editing notes. So it's got things like transcriber's notes. Attempts have been made to standardise punctuation according to the style used in the original book, blah, blah, blah. And then it talks about which pages there were things that were done differently. So that one's 27, no, that one's got 27 pages left in it. So that's 30 pages. I don't know. So I think we've got at least 2 more days of reading to go, but it may actually be slightly longer than that. I don't know. We'll find out when we actually do the reading, won't we? In the meantime, if you aren't already, then follow me on Twitch. If you're on YouTube watching this and you haven't done so, then subscribe and click on the bell icon, and then YouTube will tell you when I put up a new video. And following me on Twitch will mean that it does the same thing over there. It'll tell you when I go live, especially if you turn on notifications, because I'm pretty sure that you have an option on notifications on Twitch. So I'm delighted that you want to share the stories. If you wish to be part of my discussions that happen at the beginning, at the end, sometimes in between, because it's between chapters if they're not so long, then the best way to do that is to actually listen when I'm reading live over on Twitch. Now, if you're listening to this on YouTube, there is a link for it on my channel page on how to get to my Twitch channel, and you can join there. It's free. The same as using YouTube can be free. It is for most people. Most people don't bother paying for YouTube either. And it's all okay. It's fully legal. So yep, you'll need an email address to create an account. And the same goes for Discord if you want to get into discussions with me or with anyone else there about the books that we read, suggestions for new books to read, intriguing things that you learnt because of something that was covered that was mentioned when we're reading something. We've had small discussions about that sort of thing too. At the moment, it's very, very quiet on my Discord server, but you're most welcome to join us there. For those of you watching on Twitch, I'm going to give you my Discord link. And you're most welcome to join us there. That's another one of the free services. And there's my YouTube link. This is for people who are watching on Twitch. If you're watching on YouTube, then all you have to do is go to my channel header thing, and it will give you links for those things. And if you're watching it on YouTube, giving it a like will be great, because then YouTube will actually realize that you want to have that sort of story type thing to watch, and it will show them to you, which makes it a lot easier to find other things. If you can't remember my name, it is much more likely to then show you something more that I've read. If you have missed out on a section of a story, YouTube is the way to go. About 2 weeks after I have read a story live on Twitch, I transfer the reading over to YouTube and put it into a playlist for that book. So if you have missed out on a section of a story, you'll have to wait 2 weeks if it's only just happened that you missed it. Go over to YouTube, find the right playlist, or look through my videos list for the story that I have that's relevant. If you want some fresh stories to listen to that you haven't, and you haven't listened to all my stories when I've been reading them before, if you've only just come here, then YouTube is also the way to go for that, because I have all these playlists of the different books I've read. There's a heap of them, and there's going to be more, because I'm just going to carry on reading books, and more books are going to come into the public domain as well. So there you go. So that's it for today, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I have been enjoying this story because even though it's not quite the feel of the sort of stories I normally read, the particular author who wrote this one, there's a lot more sense of her own self in this story because of her perception of how writing works, how characterization happens, the feel that she has for the world around her that she has put into the character of Emily. There's a lot of that sort of herself that she has written into Emily, and as you read it, I think it becomes very apparent. Anyway, so I'm going to finish there and say look forward to seeing you next time, and in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.